I want to talk about why the world's largest exchange might have just exposed some of the largest Bitcoin buyers around the world. Of course, we're talking about the sovereign wealth funds who have now been exposed for buying Bitcoin. Let's listen to this interview that appeared on CNBC today.
Of that was occurring. So institutions, sovereigns, patient pools of capital were piling in during April, which resulted in about a 13% increase in Bitcoin versus 10.5 for gold. And retail via the ETF were exiting. So you got to kind of ask yourself, what do the institutions know?
Were the
that
institutions buying Bitcoin direct? And how many of them are now buying via ETFs or other forms?
So before we talk about the mechanisms of how these massive sovereigns are buying, listen very carefully to what this Coinbase executive said. The retail money is selling, the large institutional money is buying. What does this institutional capital know that we don't know? Again, question I want to explore.
Hard to say. They don't, especially the sovereign wealth funds don't report.
Right, no, but you're also, I imagine, seeing the ETFs buying. Because the ETF should be buying on a
in the last couple of days.
But the ETF should be buying on a relative basis on behalf of their customer base.
Right, assuming there are inflows, right? But the last couple of days, yes, we've had inflow. But still, as of yesterday, should change today, we've had net negative ETF inflows. So, so the first reason is de-dollarization. The second reason is this tech unwinding of this big levered tech trade and Bitcoin trading on its core characteristics, which again are similar to gold. You've got scarcity, immutability, non-sovereign asset, portability. Right. So trading the way people who believe in Bitcoin would like it to trade. Mm-hmm. The last was, to me, the most interesting, which is I spoke to a couple of traders who said, look, if you believe these conditions, these de-dollarization conditions are going to persist, you're looking at gold, obviously, first and foremost, but maybe you missed out on that trade. You're looking at that rally and saying, I missed the boat on that. So what other assets could participate in that market panic long-term inflation hedge? When you do the work, there's a very short list of assets that mirror the characteristics of gold. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin is on that short list. In addition to the 4 characteristics I mentioned, its mining scarcity, its mining difficulty gets harder over time.
Yeah, and you can add 2 or 3 more good things about Bitcoin that you didn't even mention. So, I mean, maybe it never is used to wire money or whatever you want to call it over to the Far East or something, but you certainly can do it instantaneously, frictionless, right? And
you can do it overnight.
And you don't have to, in gold, I mean, you better, it's heavy, you better store it, you better insure it. I mean, there's a lot of things.
Portability is an under-looked at, it's under-emphasized skill asset. It's very, very hard to transport large amounts of cash. It's very, very hard to transport large amounts of gold. Right. You can't put $400 million of gold on a small disk drive, tuck it under your arm, and move if you need to. So that was occurring.
So guess who is actually buying $400 million of Bitcoin, putting it on a disk drive and tucking it under your arm and transporting countries? Of course, this Coinbase exec is looking at sovereign wealth funds buying Bitcoin in large sizes. Okay, now I find, again, let's not forget, this isn't rumor, this isn't speculation, that Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East did come out in February. This is just a couple of months ago, being exposed for buying $437 million worth of a Bitcoin ETF. Let's also not forget, let's answer the question here for a moment. Who could be the sovereign wealth funds that Coinbase is talking about? We know publicly Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are buying $500 million worth of Bitcoin. But guess who else recently announced they were going to be creating a sovereign wealth fund, entering the battle of sovereign wealth funds? Of course, America. That's what this executive order signed by Donald Trump was all about. A plan for establishing a United States sovereign wealth fund. So again, maybe America is getting started on their buying of maybe Bitcoin for their sovereign wealth fund. Again, who knows? Just speculation. Again, I'll pop the tinfoil hat on for a moment. This is just speculation, but wouldn't it make sense? America's sovereign wealth fund, wouldn't they be buying Bitcoin from an American exchange like Coinbase? It would certainly make sense. And again, the question is, who is actually talking to Coinbase? Another question that's worth exploring is if and when America's sovereign wealth fund does get off the ground, how big is it going to be? Because again, I don't think the largest nation state in the world holder of the global reserve currency, is just going to create a sovereign wealth fund for it to be $50 billion in size. I don't think so. I think they're going to want to try to compete with some of the larger central banks around the world and create a sovereign wealth fund that's actually incredibly competitive. So if I were to find the largest sovereign wealth funds around the world, we know that the Japanese sovereign wealth fund is one of the biggest around the world. Another one that is absolutely huge that we mentioned in the first little part of today's video was, of course, you know it, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund. And of course, yes, as we covered, the Norwegian central bank is actively printing money to buy Bitcoin. Pretty crazy to think about. But these are the largest sovereign wealth funds. Do we really think that America won't try to compete with these guys? I think it'd be crazy to assume that they're not going to try to compete with these guys. So I reckon we got a $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund coming from America. Wouldn't they be silly to at least not buy a little 1% Bitcoin allocation in that sovereign wealth fund? That would be a cheeky little $20 billion buy, mind you. That would be, that's quite a lot of Bitcoin when you think about it, especially when you think about the available Bitcoin to buy on exchanges right now is absolutely evaporating. Again, if you are looking for somewhere to buy your Bitcoin, I always encourage you guys to check out what the Bitcoin Well is doing. They are our partner here on the YouTube channel and Brandon's YouTube channel, Green Candle, because they force you guys to self-custody your Bitcoin by default. And we're massive fans of self-custody. We don't believe you own the Bitcoin unless you take self-custody of your Bitcoin, which is why we're such massive fans of what the Bitcoin Well is doing. Okay, so whether you're a retail pleb looking for somewhere safe and secure to send your family and friend members, or whether you are a high net worth individual looking to buy Bitcoin over the counter, very tight fees, very tight spreads, low fees, we recommend what the Bitcoin Well is doing. They have a service for anyone who needs to get started on their Bitcoin buying journeys. We highly encourage you to check them out. Once you've bought the Bitcoin at the Bitcoin Well, I also always encourage you guys to check out what Stampseed is doing. Yes, it's essential that you put your Bitcoin in a hardware wallet. That's the most important step in Bitcoin. The second most important step that you can take when you self-custody your Bitcoin is writing down your 12 or 24 words. That is your Bitcoin. That's your Bitcoin private keys onto something that's not actually life-proof. Okay, I always encourage you guys, don't write down your Bitcoin backup words on paper. It's terrible. Put them on something like this. These are the titanium plates that Stampseed make. As you can hear, that's real metal, baby. Okay, so who are these giant funds buying Bitcoin? I think we've pointed some attention towards the Middle East. Certainly could be some Middle Eastern buyers buying Bitcoin through Coinbase. And who else? I mean, banks. We know banks buying Bitcoin. And maybe America's sovereign wealth fund is just about to get off the ground here. I think they would be silly to not, as this Coinbase executive said, be quietly piling in. That's the exact terminology. You can't put $400 million of gold in your pocket. You can do it with Bitcoin. That was a pretty fascinating interview I saw pop up on CNBC today. I couldn't believe it, to be quite honest, when I did see it. Something else they did mention was the ETF flows. Now, the ETF flows is something that, to be quite honest, I kind of stopped paying attention to maybe 6 to 12 months ago. Again, I've been keeping a finger on the pulse, and I think it's interesting that the flows continue. They're not slowing down. They've had periods of slowing down when the price is a little bit more boring. But as everybody's favorite ETF guru, Eric Balchunas, put it in a tweet this morning, he said the spot Bitcoin ETFs went Pac-Man mode yesterday, buying $936 million yesterday alone. We're up to $1.2 billion for the week, which is pretty crazy. This is about 13,000 Bitcoin. So the ETFs alone are buying all of the Bitcoin that is mined this calendar week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, mind you. Let's not forget, 450 Bitcoin are mined every day. Times 3, that's putting you at about 13,500 coins. And that is roughly 1.2, $1.3 billion with the price of Bitcoin where it is today, which is somewhere around $93,000. Bitcoin is back. I mean, what a surprise, right? So many people were saying Bitcoin, the bull run was over just a couple of weeks ago, and we see a little rally, and all of a sudden, we're back. Bitcoin's at 93K. Sovereign wealth funds are rumored to be buying Bitcoin. ETFs are piling in, buying $1.3 billion of Bitcoin this week alone. And all of a sudden, we're back at 93K, and people have completely forgotten the fact that you could have bought Bitcoin for $74,000 a coin on the 9th of April, just 2 weeks ago. Literally 2 weeks ago to the day, we're at $74,000 a coin, and we were screaming at you guys to buy the dip. That was a good dip to have bought if you guys did buy the dip a couple of weeks ago. Because again, I think if Coinbase now is straight up publicly coming out and saying, look, sovereign wealth funds are just quietly piling in, I think now would be a great time to be buying the dip. Again, nobody knows where the price of Bitcoin is going in the short or the medium term. We might actually break down some price predictions here in a moment, because I've seen some fascinating price predictions come out today in particular that we will cover in a moment. But again, if these massive sovereign wealth funds are buying Bitcoin, why are you not buying Bitcoin? I always encourage you guys to check out our two show sponsors, the Bitcoin Well and Stampseed, if you are looking to buy Bitcoin and then store your Bitcoin correctly. Because once these ETF flows do continue to accelerate, and once these sovereign wealth funds do continue to do what they're doing, I don't think we're going to be under $100,000 for much longer. I think our chances to buy sub 100K could really be running out. You know what they say, the first time you kind of test a level, it's kind of like, it's very rare that you test a level and then you break through it. So you can see, oh, I've got a lot of lines on this chart. Let's remove all that trash. Let's try it again. You can see we haven't spent a lot of time above 100K. You guys can see that. We've really spent a week or two above 100K. I think once we get back above 100K, this will be the time that we're above 100K when we're ready to be above $100,000. We deserve to be entrenched above that big psychological number. And psychological numbers, they're very important. We all know that. So again, speaking of psychological numbers and lines on charts, Bitcoin is absolutely ripping right now when we think about it. I think it's crazy when we have a look at how well Bitcoin has been doing just in the past week. Bitcoin's actually been performing incredibly well. Now, we all know gold has also been performing incredibly well. I do want to bring up a chart of gold here in the moment. So I think Bitcoin and gold, they're both kind of screaming to you guys that, hey, something's happening here. If Bitcoin's performing as well as it is, and gold is also performing as well as it is, maybe these are some warning signs that maybe, just maybe, somebody knows something that we don't. Again, who knows where the price of any asset is going to go in the short term, the medium term, or any of that stuff. But what I do think is that right now, you guys heard it from the Coinbase executive, sovereign wealth funds piling into Bitcoin. They're buying big, they're not slowing down, they're buying on this dip. And again, I always remind you guys, nobody knows whether the price of any asset is going in the short or the medium term, but just simply paying attention to what the big money is doing certainly cannot hurt. Paying very close attention to what the big money is doing, not a bad idea at all. Now, what I want to have a look at here in a minute is the new Bitcoin buyer entering the market, because we are seeing a new Bitcoin buyer enter the market here that I want to discuss. But before we get there, I want to talk about something that I saw on Bloomberg, because I found it pretty interesting. Now, we all know most traditional media is, as Jake Thomas in the chat says, full of holes. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, because most traditional media is trash. Let's be honest. I don't think that's a spicy statement. I just think that's true. But what I do think is awfully interesting is that traditional media is sometimes on the money, and sometimes we do need to be paying attention to the narratives on traditional media. So with that said, I want to actually entertain you guys with a little bit of hypothetical thought experiment. Bitcoin